I want to welcome you today to this session on knowing your international buyer or seller, how to conduct due diligence on third parties. And we are pleased to have your presenters today as Dr. Mercedes Sanchez-Moore, who is our International Trade Director here at the NYSBDC, and Robert Leo Esquire, who is a partner with, and you're going to have to help me here, Meeks. Oh, wait,
Shepherd.
Meeks, Shepherd,
Shepherd.
Leo, and Pillsbury, LLP. Got it all. Thank
Got
you.
it.
This webinar is brought to you by the NYSBDC International Trade Initiative. The NYSBDC is a U.S. Small Business Administration resource partner with locations across New York State. And we are pleased to deliver no-cost, high-quality advising, research, education, and advocacy services to New York State entrepreneurs and small business owners. So you know today we are recording. Attendees will not be on camera, and you will receive a link to the recording and a PDF of Mercedes' slides in a follow-up email after the webinar. Now, we are going to have a few points for questions during this presentation today. There will be a first section by Dr. Sanchez-Moore, and we'll do some questions after that on her material that she's covering. And then we'll have some more questions after Robert presents on a different but related topic. And we invite you to drop your questions in the Q&A box or the chat. We'll be monitoring both, and I'll make sure that the chat is on here in just a moment. Now, with that, I think we have done all of the housekeeping, and I will turn the time over to Dr. Sanchez-Moore.
Thank you, Jenny. Are you going to show my
I
slide?
will. So go ahead and get going, and I will switch over to your slides.
Awesome. As Jenny said, I'm the Director of the International Trade Initiative for the New York Small Business Development Center, and this is one of our webinars that will be also available publicly after we conduct this session, and we will share my slides as well. So we're going to get going here. Next, please. There you go. As Jenny explained, the New York SBDC is a partnership of the U.S. Small Business Administration, who is actually our funder. We are hosted by SUNY, the City University of New York is another partner, New York State, higher education institutions, and the private sector. The SBDC provides one-to-one business advisement, training, and research in support of entrepreneurship and economic development for the state of New York. Next, please. The International Trade Initiative is a special program within the New York SBDC network, which is housed and part of the SUNY network of 20 regional centers and 72 outreach and satellite offices. You can see the dots there in that map that we are showing. And we are actually in every corner of the state. 98% of the population in the state of New York is within 30 minutes of an SBDC location. Next, please. The New York SBDC International Trade Initiative supports SBDC clients statewide with expertise and experience in international trade and trade compliance, the topic of today. We also provide SBDC staff with professional development, increasing advising capabilities statewide. As Jenny mentioned, all of our services are free, customized, and 100% confidential. We help small and medium-sized companies become globally competitive by providing export development and import operations assistance through one-to-one consulting, market research, innovative training, and links to additional export resources provided by our partners, Global New York, the U.S. Commercial Service of the Department of Commerce, the Small Business Administration, Exim Bank, and other public and private institutions. Next, please. We do provide both exporting and importing assistance, and in regards to exporting, which is actually where we are heavy task, we help companies understand if they are ready to export, and we also assist them planning their strategies and create, after we discuss every item, an export business plan, at least a draft. We also assist companies understanding where are the markets that show demand for their products and discuss what would be best for them in regards to sales and distribution channels. We provide quite a bit of education on legal considerations. We do not provide any legal advice. We provide guidance, but we refer to legal resources of partners like Robert that is here with us. We do assist with logistic and export documentation issues, market research, trade statistics, and we also help companies obtain financing for their exports. Next, please. On the import side, we have provided already, and we continue providing assistance and education on import basics to understand the processes. And also, something that is super important both for import and export is to understand your classification internationally, the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. We also provide information, only information and guidance, again, on tariffs, no legal advice. We do referrals to custom brokers and attorneys, and we also provide information on import regulations that affect each different product in every country that is being sourced from. We advise and provide education on food. Importing foods are very special because they require certification of the FDA in overseas facilities. We also assist with logistic and import documentation issues, and again, market research, trade statistics, and also financing for sourcing from overseas. And we are going to be doing our next webinar in March. Is called Manufacturing and International Financing, and I would recommend if you are looking for funds that you come and listen to us again. Next, please. All right, so this is the topic of today. I am going to take care of the knowing your international customer, which is more on the exporting side, of course. And I want to provide you first with background information to understand the context of the topic. We're going to speak about the U.S. Export Administration briefly, also about the government agencies that have export responsibilities, the general provisions in the EER that will allow you to understand what things should not be done that will get you in trouble, and we will cover at large the Know Your Customer guidance provided by the Bureau of Industry and Security and the red flags that are in the supplement number 3 to part 732 of the Code of Federal Regulations number 15. We will also provide information on what are the common red flags that you should be aware of and how can you conduct due diligence to avoid any risk. And then we also discuss further on how to mitigate the risk and ensuring compliance in the last slide. Next, please. The Export Administration Regulations, called also EAR, are also known as export controls and are a set of rules governing what can be exported, where it can go, and to whom, and what is called in compliance jargon refers to end user, end use, and destination of exports. These rules were enacted to protect national security, foreign policy, and economic interests of the United States. ER regulates exports, re-exports, and transfer of dual-use commodities, materials, software, and technologies with both civil and military applications. That is what it means. Dual use. The export administration regulations are located in the Code of Federal Regulations number 15, parts 730 to 774, in case you want to read them or be aware, at least be aware of how to consult them. The Bureau of Industry and Security of the U.S. Department of Commerce administers and enforces the export administration regulations. And the purpose for controlling exports are, again, to keep the nation safe, protect U.S. economic interests and foreign policy, ensure that specific products are not exported without the proper licenses, and to regulate transactions that involve restricted uses, countries, entities, and individuals. Next, please. Well, here in this slide, you can see a very long list of the agencies that have export control responsibility. For us, especially for companies that are new to export, which are the majority of our clients, the main agencies that we should be concerned is the Bureau of Industry and Security that administers and enforces the export administration regulations, and also the Office of Foreign Asset Controls that oversees U.S. economic sanctions and embargoes, restricting certain transactions and maintaining the specially designated national list, among others. And then also the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls from the State Department that administers the ITAR, the International Trading and Regulations, and oversees the defense items on the U.S. munition list. I also want to point out that the U.S. and Customs Protection ensures that goods comply with both U.S. laws at entry and at exit. So both for the exporting and importing, that's why they are mentioned here. Next slide, please. Well, Part 736 of the EAR outlines these 10 general provisions that apply to all export transactions regulated by the BIS. These provisions determine when a license or a license exception is required based on the item classification, the merchandise, the destination country, the end user that is going to get the goods, the end use, on how these goods are going to be utilized, and also certain activities such as financing. Now, general provisions for 210 focus on specific restricted activities involving items subject to the ER, whether or not they are listed in the Commerce Control List, require or don't require a license per se. Provision 4 bars transactions with parties subject to BIS denial orders. Provision 5 restricts exports to prohibited end uses or end users, including those listed in the entity list in supplement number 4 to part 744. Provision 6 addresses exports to comprehensively embargoed destinations. Provision 7 prohibits support for weapons proliferation activities. Provision 8 covers in-transit shipments of unloaded goods. 9 prohibits violations of license terms or orders. And number 10 forbids proceeding with transactions when there is a knowledge of a violation, which this is important for our case. And you will see now in my slides why 10 is the one that applies to us. Next, please. All right. The Bureau of Industry and Security, again, which we denominate BIS, Know Your Customers, guidance was created to strengthen exporters' ability to detect and prevent violations of the general prohibitions in the ER regarding improper end user or destination. In other words, we don't want US merchandise going to the hands of the wrong person, any bad actors or any countries that are embargo or sanctioned and we don't have good relations. Know Your Customer emphasizes that exporters might not self-blind. Remember number 10 that I said that you cannot proceed if you know that something is going on? That's what it means, self-blind, by ignoring red flags, and instead you have to collect and conduct due diligence when suspicious circumstances arise. Something is off. You need to wonder and continue investigating what is going on with that transaction. These include verifying customer information and screening parties against the Consolidated Screening List that we will see a little bit later in the presentation, and also documenting findings before you proceed. At the end of 2024, the BIS added some more red flags in an effort to strengthen export controls on advanced computing items, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and specifically to combat the diversion of technology to restricted entities in China. Certain ER provisions require exporters to apply for a validated license if they know that otherwise there is a license exam export if it's going to be used for nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons, related missile delivery systems, or other prohibited end uses in specific regulations. BIS guidance clarifies how to interpret and apply this knowledge standard without changing the regulations. So this is only guidance. It's not a legal requirement, but it's also super advisable that you conduct due diligence and also document it in case things go south, there are problems, and you haven't done anything, and guess what? You're going to have penalty fines and a ton of trouble coming at you all at once. So doing due diligence is truly, and documenting it, actually, what the due diligence that you're going to be doing is your way to actually prevent any of these issues happening to you, okay? Or lower the penalties and the fines, etc. They will look at you with better eyes if you have done it. Let's see that. Next, please. All right. So Know Your Customer guidance instruct exporters to avoid self-blinding. Again, I'm going to be repeating this several times so you can record it there in your memory, by actively ignoring red flags regarding the end user and use or destination of the goods. So the question that you might ask to yourself is my customer listed on a US government proscribed list? You know, mostly it means that they are prohibited in some sort of way. Is this transaction normal? Does it make sense? Or are there any red flags, something that is off? And we define red flags are warning signs indicated that the transaction might involve prohibited end users or destinations. Next, please. The BIS has published a long list of potential red flags to advise the community on how to identify when things are suspicious or unusual. As you see here in this slide, one of them, if you are asking questions to your customer and all of a sudden they have an evasive behavior and they are very vague when you ask about how you're going to be using my item and the export, or are you going to re-export to another destination other than the one that you are right now living, that's actually a potential problem. Also, if they are asking you for a product that doesn't align with the normal business activity that the customer has. When you do an investigation, you are dealing with a furniture store, and all of a sudden they want to purchase a specialized laboratory equipment. Why in the world will a furniture store want to purchase that? You know, you have to wonder. Some other things, there is some unusual shipping requirements, also for the destination in itself, or the packaging as well. And it's going to be routed through a country that is not the true final destination, or the packaging is inconsistent with the stated shipping method. I can tell you a story that is true, that happened when I was working in Ohio. One of the customs officers in the port of Cincinnati saw that there was a shipment of rice in a weather container, in a container that was weatherized, and it was frozen. And it was like, okay, why would you ever want to freeze rice? That didn't make sense at all. And they stopped the shipment, they stopped the cargo, they checked, and there were weapons actually, and they were destined to a country in South America. So that is about the packaging and the method of shipment. You know, that is incongruent with the materials that they are declaring. Other issues might be from, you know, when the buyer, your buyer declines services that you are providing, and they refuse the standard installation, the training that you normally provide for the items that you're selling, or maintenance services that are typically included and that you recommend to everybody. Sometimes if the client is using an abnormal payment method, let's say that is a super expensive item and the customer offers cash, all right, or use an unusual third-party payment or proposes irregular payment agreements that you don't have normally with the rest of clients, you know, your clients. So again, if something doesn't feel right, it's off, pause and ask yourself, is there a red flag or not? If there are no red flags, then proceed carefully. If nothing suspicious appears, you might realize on whatever your customer is telling you, and there is no duty from your side to go behind representation unless you have found warning signs, a red flag that tells you that you should investigate. Next, please. By the way, if you want to know more cases of red flags, I can send them over to you, so you can just shoot me an email. And I think there are right now more than 20 some that have been published by BIS, and I will send them. So what to do when you have identified a red flag? The advice, always do due diligence. And how to start doing this? Just pause, think, and start documenting everything. I suspect that this transaction doesn't look good because so and so and so. And then maintain detailed records of communications with your client and other parties that you're trying to clarify what is going on, any explanations that they are providing to you, and the supporting evidence. You should also verify the client, confirm that it's a legitimate person and is the purchaser, validate their business activities. You can also, if you want, send me an email. The U.S. Department of Commerce has a service that through their embassies overseas, they will be able to provide further information, at sometimes at a cost, sometimes not. It depends on the activity. Sometimes even a person from the embassy will visit the company if things are required and there is a very large transaction with large dollar volume. You should also confirm what your item is going to be used for, the end use, and the country of destination. ensure that the product's intended use is what it's going to be used for, and that both the end use and the destination are accurate and consistent. For that, you can use, actually, you should check this often because it changes. The sanctioned and embargo countries. Remember that I mentioned OFAC, the Office of Foreign Controls from the US Department of Treasury. They have a list that I'm going to give you also more information later about. Also, you should screen for restricted parties. What I mean, some people that have violations and denial orders and have done something that has, it has been considered wrong, and they're in that particular list for a reason, you should utilize the Consolidated Screening List from the Bureau of Industry and Security. That is the list of parties of concern. And it compiles quite a few lists. That's what it's called, consolidated. You should also review the payment methods, scrutinize any unusual payment structures, offers to pay with cash if it's a very large amount, or third-party payments. Examine the shipping routes and investigate if there is any abnormal rerouting, transshipment, and going to other place than where actually they told you it was gonna go. Resolve the issue or escalate internally if you are not the owner of the business to a compliance or senior official. And if you cannot resolve all the issues and there are still doubts, first, reevaluate all the information and stop the transaction. You cannot ignore that there are warning signs that you have not resolved, okay? And you can contact BIS to apply for an export license before you proceed, or at least consult with them the situation to get some advice. I am also gonna provide you some further information on what to do, because you, of course, you can always talk to Mr. Robert Leo, and he will advise you if you should continue or not, or what are the, if you should apply for an export license in that particular transaction. Next, please. Here are two very important and free to use government resources to do due diligence screening. As I mentioned prior, the list of parties of concerns is the BIS Consolidated Screening List. In this, we call parties of concerns to individuals or entities that are restricted from receiving certain exports without a license or subject to additional scrutiny. The Consolidated Screening List has combined multiple U.S. export screening lists from all the agencies that I showed you in that slide prior. I don't have the list here, but if you want, I can send you two slides that have the kind of like, I think, over 20 different lists that are produced with these party of concerns from the different agencies involved. Here you have the link, and once I send you the slides, you will be able to access it directly. And if you find a match while you're doing the screening and you enter the information of the party of concern, the match might indicate that there is a prohibition against that person to export from the United States or receiving any exports from the United States, that the transaction will require a license, an export license, or it will simply tell you, watch out, there is a red flag here, so proceed with care. OFAC also has a sanction list search tool to check names, entities, and addresses against the specially designated national and consolidated sanctions list. There are more lists here, consolidated as well. As I said before, you should always have handy the information about sanctions and embargo countries because it changes over time. We are not always at odds with the same countries. Remember before we had problems with Iraq. Now Iraq is not listed here. But you see Iran, you see Cuba, North Korea, Syria, and specific regions of Ukraine, mostly the ones that have been conquered by Russia, have been occupied by Russia right now. Okay, this is what the comprehensive embargoes, countries that are under comprehensive embargo. But there are also targeted and regional sanctions. And you should read about it if anything is gonna go to any of these countries that you see here: Balkans, Belarus, Burma, which was the former Myanmar, Central African Republic, Democratic of Congo, Ethiopia, Hong Kong, Iraq. So Iraq is not embargo, but now there are some restricted sanctions. Lebanon, Libya, Mali, Nicaragua, Russia, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Venezuela, Yemen, and Zimbabwe. And also, there are developments happening right now in Venezuela, so the situation might change as well. Okay, so that's why you should check on this frequently. Next, please. There you go. And these are the final thoughts for the Know Your Customer guidance. Again, I will repeat it over and over and over. Do not self-blind. If something doesn't look good, even there's a lot of money, and I've been there than that when I was a manager of a freight forwarder firm. They have come proposing transactions that didn't look good at all, and you had to put the brakes, even though there is a ton of money involved in it. And actually, you know, they were shipping to Holland, to Amsterdam, but they told me they were gonna transship it to Africa and to a country that was embargoed. They were like, bang, stop. Even though I was not the exporter, I was the freight forwarder, I had the obligation to terminate that transaction. That is at least in our firm. You know, if they want to go to somebody else's, I cannot do anything about it. But do not engage in something that it doesn't look good. Okay? So don't avoid asking about end use or destination. Don't instruct employees that work for you to ignore sensitive details. Don't create policies that avoid learning about bad stuff regarding the transaction. The knowledge of your employees is the knowledge of the companies. There are many companies that got in trouble because their employees didn't follow the compliance guidelines that they had. I know many cases, and also there is a publication from BIS that said, don't let this happen to you, which provides a ton of information about cases gone wrong. And many of them are employees that are trying to make, you know, a buck, and they don't protect the company. So you need to be aware that is the whole team needs to be trained and aware of everything that we've been talking here today. So in regards to the steps that we were talking, the step number 4 is doing a review on the entire transaction. If your concerns are resolved, then proceed with the export activity. If there are concerns that are still unsolved, then again, you should stop. And then you should submit a request to BIS for a validated license or seek legal and compliance expertise. In regards to how you can mitigate risk and ensure compliance, it's always best to implement a robust compliance program and document everything that you are doing and train your people and make them aware of what this program is. Conduct regular audits and assessments of how things are going and if they are actually using the instructions that are in the compliance program. Also, attending webinars like this allows you to stay informed about regulatory changes. If you hear anything on TV, you always hear when there is something going on with certain countries, and all of a sudden, you should check, had they been placed in a sanction or an embargo or etc. Okay? And I will say again, seek legal and compliance expertise. Don't avoid dealing with the problem. Realize that exporters are the first line of defense for our national security. That's pretty serious. Just think about that. And also, when unsure about the red flag, contact the Bureau of Industry and Security or submit a confidential tip. You don't even have to give your name. All right? Well, thank you so much. I think that this concludes my presentation, and now we can entertain questions that I think Mr. Leo is more adequate to respond because he's the attorney.
Okay, so before we go on to Robert's portion of the presentation, we want to make sure that we get any questions answered on what you've just heard from Dr. Mercedes Sanchez-Moore. So now is your time to go ahead and type that in the Q&A box. Chat's also open. We're monitoring both. Now, we did have a question come in about where to find the database to verify suppliers. So that came in before you had done one of your slides on that. So if that person, Alejandro, if you have a follow-up question, please do let us know. You will get a copy of these slides, and then Dr. Mercedes Sanchez-Moore's email is in the chat if you would like to email her for some of those further resources that she mentioned.
Suppliers are not the same as buyers.
Oh, okay.
It's
Sorry,
the
I
other
missed that.
side of the
So let's have you talk
equation.
about that.
Yes. Now, Robert will speak about how to do the compliance on your vendor. So what is the information that you need to get? For me, my side is your customer, your buyer of your materials that are going to be exported.
All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and move on then.
Thank you, Jenny.
Okay, thank you, Mercedes. That was very good, very comprehensive. I would like to add a couple of points from a legal perspective to that.
Yes.
One, Mercedes covered why it's important to know all this. And another issue is not only penalties, your loss of business, but the Department of Commerce can put you on a list where you can no longer export. And in between that, and a company just got this because they really screwed up over the course of 4 years and were exporting to Iran through Germany and knew about it and didn't do anything about it. The whole compliance staff was fired. The procurement director was fired. I believe a VP was fired who knew about it as well. But they took away their export. They put them on a temporary suspension list, meaning that they could not export without permission from BIS, and if they didn't comply, and they had to have a self audit and an outside auditor appointed at the same time, if they didn't do all this, they would just lose their ability to export, which means you would lose your business. So that's very important. The red flags, as Mercedes said, are very important, especially General Prohibition 10. Reason to know is in there. Reason to know. So to Mercedes' point about self-blinding, if somebody said, "Hey, is this going to Russia?" and you said, "Well, we think so, but we're shipping it to Germany, so we don't care if it's going on to Russia." That's a reason to know that's General Prohibition 10, and BIS leans on that prohibition a lot, that if they're going after a company for an export violation, it's you should have known this, or you did know, you had some idea that this was going to happen and you ignored it. So that's another important point. A couple of others you can, what BIS and OFAC are worried about right now with China and Russia. It started with China, it's moved to Russia as well, not moved away from it's with both, is diversion. So you can ship to certain companies in China, you can ship to certain companies in Russia if you get an export license. And we've submitted export licenses for companies that are shipping both to either Russia or to China. And they're shipping to known entities, but either the license request is held up or it comes back saying, how are you preventing diversion to the semiconductor company in China, for example, that's on the list? Even though you're not on the list, you're affiliated with that company, maybe in some way. How are you preventing diversion? What are your diversion controls? The same with Russia, because it turned out we were advising a medical device company, and they were shipping to hospitals, but it turned out one of their they had a list of their customers, and some of them were related to the government. And it turned out that they had no diversion policies in place. And the Russian team was saying, well, but it's for a hospital, but the hospital turned out to be run by the military. And that hospital was not on any list, but the Russian military was definitely listed. And they said, you're not preventing diversion to this hospital, so you have to put in procedures and policies to do that. Some of those procedures and policies are you say we want physical checks, we're going to send our team in twice a year, or you have to report your production of our material to us so we know that you used it all up, that you don't have anything left over. So that's another important point about diversion. The in-between point, which is going to be on the know your vendors as well as know your buyers, is are you dealing with a trading company? If you see a trade, and these are big in Dubai and the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and we got a client one time because the general counsel saw me at a conference and said, "Can I talk to you privately?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "So we got one of our containers back, and it had Arabic writing all over it, and when we translated it, it was Tehran, and this was years ago, but it was still embargoed. And we don't sell to Iran. We've never sold to Iran. We checked with our distributor in Singapore, and they had sent it through Dubai, and the person in Dubai said, we're not subject to sanctions. We can deal with Iran. So they sent their product without anybody knowing, they sent it to Iran. That's a violation. The bottom line with that one is it went to a hospital. So there's a general license for Iran for medical devices and medicines and food going to hospitals or for the humanitarian purposes. So they got away with a warning letter at the end. But that led to what a common practice is a voluntary self-disclosure. And it's allowed for in the regulations, in the export regulations. The company or person can make a voluntary self-disclosure. It mitigates the penalty. So if you know something that happened or might happen, and you disclose it, you'll get now with this BIS and not just with this administration, but even prior administration, they moved from voluntary self-disclosure would be a slap on the wrist. You get a letter saying, don't do this again, or else. Now you automatically get a penalty, but it's half the penalty you would normally get. But it still can be a huge penalty. But a voluntary self-disclosure is an administrative process. A qualified consultant can help you, lawyer can help you, but you want to know all the facts before you go to BIS to tell them anything. You don't want your employees to pick up the phone and say, hey, we think we have a violation, without knowing whether you have a violation or not, because the BIS will assume that it's a violation and they'll come in before you can do anything to fix your internal system or even look at your internal system. So you have to be very careful about that as well. Just another another issue with that, or an example, is there are a lot of whistleblower claims out there now. A lot of them do not have merit because people are reporting alleged violations that are not violations. But for your company or your business, you need to know, you have, as Mercedes said, you have to have your policies and procedures in place and locked down. You need a chain of command, who it's reported to, and what's going to happen when it goes. Do you report, do export logistics and exporting go, or procurement go up through legal? Does it go through logistics? Does it go to the general counsel's office sideways? Does it not go through your general counsel's office? That is all, and it's not just big companies, but even in a small company, you need to know that. And then finally, speaking of small companies, really, if somebody is doing your exports for years and they leave or retire or hit the lottery, which I have not been lucky enough to do, they will take that knowledge with them. And if you don't have policies and procedures in place for yourselves, even in a small 5-person company, you can be in a lot of trouble. And then one last thing, because this reminded me of another example. Small company here in New York and in New York City, BIS showed up one day, took all their computers, all their documents out of the blue. It turns out the company did nothing wrong, but they didn't have compliance procedures in place. The BIS found one of their food, it was basically a food product. I think it was popcorn, I'm not sure, had gone to a freight forwarder in Hong Kong who was listed, but they didn't know that it was going, they weren't using that freight forwarder. Their freight forwarder used that freight forwarder in Hong Kong that was listed. And instead of the popcorn going to Hong Kong, which at that time was not embargoed or restricted in any way, it ended up in Afghanistan during the Afghanistan war. Mm. And BIS was trying to make a big deal out of it. And the first response from the company, which I thought was actually very funny, which was not the best way to respond, was, do you think we're sending popcorn to Afghan to have the Afghani soldiers choke on our popcorn? This is like the popcorn you put in a microwave. We didn't know it was going there. It's totally on that freight forwarder. So as a small exporter or a large or part of a large export procedure, a large exporting company, you really need to have all this locked down. So I'll end there and get to know your vendor. By introduction.
Really quickly, before you continue, I just wanted to share a comment with you that one of our attendees said those are important nuances that would never occur to newly formed small business exporters. So thank you. Big thank you for that. And then Mercedes, there is a question in the Q&A box for you. So if you want to go address that, then we'll be ready to continue on.
Yes, I believe that this person is asking if we support exporters that use items from the United States. Of course, used items is not the same as an end user or an end use. Okay, I have clients that are shipping used clothing or furniture of other items. So yes, that's not a problem. Used items are okay as long as the items are not regulated by the Export Administration regulations. What I mean is that an item that requires a license, if it's used or not, many medical equipment, that will be the case. For example, for a pressure regulator or an X-ray machine, etc., that requires a license, even if it's new or used. It doesn't matter. But just contact me. You saw my email there. Please send me an email and then let's chat about how can I assist you, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, good question and good answer on that. So our firm, we are a boutique trade law firm. We have specialized in just trade law, advising importers and exporters for, I won't tell you how many decades, but it's more than 2. We have large companies, small companies, individuals. We do a lot of, we were doing a lot of export sanctions until January 20th of last year when tariffs came into play. And now we're doing a lot of tariff-related work, as you all know from over the weekend. For those of you in compliance and trade compliance, now your family, as I say, my family now knows what I do for a living after all these years, and everybody else does too, because it's all over the place. So I apologize because of the Supreme Court decision on Friday and leading up to that. I did not get a chance to do any slides, but I do have bullet points that we can forward after this to check bullet points for knowing your vendor. And I'm going to go through them, and I'm open for questions. I'll probably go pretty quickly on this, but you want to check. It's basically, some of these are the same as know your buyer overseas, but this is knowing your vendor, especially overseas. You want to check the lists. Again, the same list that Mercedes talked about, and you'll have the links to OFAC list, the BIS list for your vendor, but also any intermediaries. We talked about freight forwarders. There's a lot with the tariffs. As an example, there have been a lot of freight forwarders from China that set up companies in the United States and are using those companies as importers into the United States. Are they legitimate? Do they have the right to import? There's something called right to make entry into the United States. You want to know, more importantly, though, are these forwarders, the banks, the carriers, are any of these on these embargoed lists or restricted lists? So again, that's the OFAC and BIS list, that consolidated list. One other I would recommend, and it's based in Europe, it's called opensanctions.org. And it's all one word, open sanctions with an S.org. And you can sign up for a subscription, but you don't have to. It's a quick check of whether an entity or a person that you're buying from is on one of these lists. And what is the reason for that? The reason is, and Mercedes, I think you said this, Mercedes, OFAC, if a person is on the OFAC list, the specially designated national list, you can't import from them. You can't buy from them. You can't be in a transaction with them, whether it's import or export, or even if they're somehow related to the transaction, you can't deal with them. So it's important to know if they're on any of these lists. Open Sanctions says that. If you use that, they'll pop up. They may pop up there. You have to be careful because it covers sanctions by every country. So it'll pop up. Ukraine has many more sanctions, obviously, on Russia and individuals than the EU or the US does. Ukraine's sanctions does not mean that the US person can't deal with that entity if it's not on the US list. It is sort of a red flag that you want to double check, but it's not another country, or the EU's sanctions do not dictate what you can do in the US, but you should be careful about it. I would hesitate with any of these checks we're going to talk about. You can use AI to start with. Don't use it as the final answer, because AI in our field, in the trade field and exports and imports, we've been trying to use it. We don't use it for legal submissions, unlike other law firms that have gotten in trouble for that. But we do use it as an initial check, and it can be very helpful of who's related to whom, because AI is all public documents. It can only go into public documents. So, but for trade law and import regulations and export regulations, a lot of the answers in AI are circular. You'll say, are there restrictions on this company from Russia? Well, there could be sanctions. The answer comes back, there could be sanctions by many countries on this company in Russia, blah, 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 or they'll tell you something about the company that's not relevant to what you're asking. So you have to be very precise in your direction to AI, but please do not use that as the final word, because it may pop up with the consolidated export screening list. That's great. But you want to go to the list itself, not take AI's word for it. So some other things you want to double check here. You want to run a background check on the vendor that's selling to you and verify their location and capacity. So the background check, if it's one person, it's kind of hard to do in another country, but there's some simple ways to do this. Location and capacity is very easy to do by by Google, are they located where they say they're located? One, in the country, and then is it just a storefront, or is it an actual plant, or is it just a mailbox? And we just had a question from a client, and it turns out the company was on the list, but it's no longer in business, but the address still shows up as a big a corporate building in London, in downtown London, which in the center of the business center. But all it is a building that rents out spaces, like small offices, to companies that are starting up. And these companies had rented spaces there 2 years ago and had registered there. This building also offers corporate registration. And sorry, something else popped up on my screen here. The building offered company registration. So if there may be 50 companies in the building at any one time, but they have over 200 registrations. So you want to verify exactly where the company is, the location. If you can get the latitude and longitude, then you can go to Google Maps. I know this sounds a little bit out there, but go to Google Maps and go down and see what's there. If it's just a small building or a floor, a small office in a business center, then do they have the capacity to make what they say they're making? And if they don't have that capacity, maybe they're a middleman and they're buying from somebody else. Well, who are they getting that from? They maybe not want to give you that name, but you have to have some idea of who that might be, or where country are you getting it from? Is it actually made? And we're getting this a lot with Russia, because a lot of the imports from Russia into the United States are banned now too. You say, well, no, it's coming from Kazakhstan, or from, in one case, Czechoslovakia, but they were importing a component from Russia that's not banned, but it's still, that component's coming from Russia. So how do you have to know where the location is, the capacity for your order. If you order 1,000 pieces and they're in the storefront, like in a strip mall somewhere, they're not going to be able to fulfill your order. That means they're getting it from somewhere else. References, if you can get them. How did you find out about this person or this vendor? Who referred them? You can do a Google or independent search. Use an independent search firm to get more information about this vendor. Not only where they are, but what they're about. Do they have a legitimate web page? You can check this through the chambers of commerce in the country. Like there's an American, in most countries, there's an American, substitute the name of the country, America, Kenya, Chamber of Commerce, America, China, Chamber of Commerce. If the company may not be a member, because you have to pay to be a member, but if they are a member, that means they're in pretty good standing. That you can check with the Chambers of Commerce. Also, as Mercedes said, you can check with the Commerce Department's foreign offices, and you can send them emails saying, is this a legitimate company? And as Mercedes says, they may charge you for that, but it's probably worth it. If you want to do your own visits, site visits, that's great too. If you've been there and you know the person and you know the quality, and you know the location, and you've seen their factory or wherever the goods are made, that's even better than all of this, because you can verify it. And if you do that, I would ask permission first, so they don't arrest you as a spy, but take pictures, see what they're doing, ask them questions about their capacity. What happens if you get additional orders? If this takes off, what's going to happen? That type of thing. Google and other search mechanisms, search engines are good for checking corporate registration. If you can do it, you can. In a lot of countries, you can, like Britain is a good example of the UK. It's public corporate registration, and in the United States too. Each state has their corporate registration that you can access and see if a company is registered. The same with foreign countries. So is your vendor a corporation that is registered? Is it one person operating out of their house? But check that to see what the corporate registration is and who signed the corporate registration. Because if it's a larger company, you want to know who those individuals are. Because if you see the company is ABC Corporation, registered in Hungary, and you see Vladimir Putin's name as one of the officers, that's a major red flag, and red being the operative color there. So you want to know about the corporate registration, and you can get that via email. The best thing now is all these search engines, Google, whatever you use, Bing, the Microsoft one, Edge, that you can translate pretty easily, and it's pretty good. The translation function on these now are much better than they used to be. And if you get something in Russian or in Chinese, you can translate it, and you get at least maybe 75% of the information translates word for word. So those are good search engines to use. Check the corporate registration and see. And as I said with my example, they were checking the company. They didn't know they had an order from the company. And then when I checked it for them, I found out that the company had dissolved. It had been located in that business building in the UK in London, but it dissolved 2 years ago, according to the corporate records. So who's ordering this stuff, and where is it going? That's the questions that come up when you do these checks. Another big issue now, and I'm sure you've heard about it, is forced labor. So forced labor is, and it's not just the old movies of chain gangs and things like that. Forced labor is child labor, it's indentured servitude. There was a case where a woman was hired as a maid in India, was there for 30 years, was never allowed a vacation, never allowed to leave the house for 30 years. She didn't get paid, but she got food and shelter. And they brought up the couple that had basically abused her that way for violating the India's forced labor laws. And that in child labor, forced labor, prison labor in other countries, you read about it with regard to China and cotton coming from certain products coming from the Xinjiang region in China, where the Uyghurs were located or relocated to. But you need to verify that there's no forced labor. Well, how do you verify? You ask directly, do you use any forced labor? Or what kind of, who works in your company? How much do you pay? What are their hours? Because there are a lot of companies in China that are legitimate companies, but they set up these dorms and they don't allow the workers to leave the dorms. They make them work I'm exaggerating, probably like 14-hour days. That could be considered forced labor. A good way to find out or to verify as much as possible on forced labor is to, number one, ask questions of your vendor. Two, if you put in focus questions into AI is very good at this, of knowing if there's any public documents or reports that have been issued that say that this company is possibly using forced labor or possibly using forced labor. You want to be careful because a lot of the forced labor, so U.S. Customs on the import side can stop your shipments because they suspect forced labor has been used. And there is a list published by DHS, by Department of Homeland Security, of known forced labor entities, but it's very minimal compared to what they actually know. And since forced labor has been the law in the United States, anti-forced labor has been the law since 1930. It hasn't been enforced as much until recently when they passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in 2023, I believe it was, or 2022, and made it specific to Uyghur forced labor in China, but there's forced labor, the law is already there. So you want to be careful when you do this search because with these forced labor, especially from China, there are a lot of non-governmental organization reports out there, research reports, and these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, issue these reports, and they make, the way it's written, it says that this company or this region is using forced labor, but then when you look at the footnotes, it's like, well, this is based on research done by another NGO 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But it is a red flag to use the term on the exports as well, that if your vendor shows up in a forced labor context anywhere on the web, on the legitimate web or in an NGO report, even if it's not on customs list or DHS's list, that is a major red flag. And you have to ask more questions about your vendor and maybe get a new vendor, because China does not consider, I'm using China's example, I don't mean to beat on them, but China does not consider the use of Uyghur workers who they pay allegedly and house to be forced labor. It doesn't fall under forced labor under their forced labor law. China says we have a forced labor law, but this is not forced labor. Well, it is forced labor under the U.S. law. So, and that's since you're in the U.S. and you're importing into the United States from a vendor overseas, or well, I'll get to that in a minute. Say from overseas, you have to go by the U.S. law. So these NGO reports are some evidence that there is forced labor there, and you have to be very careful. One other issue with forced labor that you should know about, there's two. One is that it's not just forced labor outside the country. It's also, you're not allowed to use forced labor depending on which state you're in. The forced labor, like prison labor, convict labor in the United States, is banned except for certain circumstances. So New York State, they pay the convicts to make certain things. The old one was, license plates. Convicts made license plates, but that is allowed. But the interstate transportation of convict labor is not allowed. So how does that work? If the inmates in New York State make the license plates for New York State, that's fine because they're not going to be sending those outside of New York. But if you use convict labor to make textile apparel, and then you want to ship it to somebody, your vendor says, yeah, well, I make it in New York State, upstate somewhere near Dannemora, and then you find out it's in the prison and you've been sending it to customers all over the United States, you could be violating those states' forced labor rules. So you want to know exactly where your product is coming from, even if you're not importing it, but if you're importing it especially, is forced labor involved in any way. I mentioned on-site visits, regardless of the issue, that's very important. All the government agencies say, well, have you visited the place? Do you have pictures? We have clients, and not in this context, about knowing your vendor, but they were, well, actually it is, because they were subject to dumping duties because customs was saying dumping duties are additional duties on top of your regular ones because the goods are sold in the United States at lesser than fair value. And we have about 200 dumping cases and other cases against Chinese products aside from the tariffs. But customs imposed additional duty on one of our clients saying your product is made in China, and therefore there's the dumping case and it's 140% additional tariff on your product because it was made in China. It turns out that it wasn't made in China. It was made in Cambodia. And I said, can you prove that? You have to prove that's made in Cambodia. So the client went over there. He took pictures. He had the longitude, the latitude. He had a video of the production facility of them making it, that it was and it was a Cambodian-owned company, not a Chinese-owned company. But it was also that everything was made in Cambodia. And we were successful in getting the Commerce Department to agree that it wasn't subject to the scope of the dumping case against China. So the on-site visit in that case really saved the day, because otherwise you're taking the word for it. I know if you're setting up your own business or you have a small business, an on-site visit might not be possible. But if you can hire somebody to do that work overseas for you, and you have to vet that person too, so can you make an on-site visit for me? Then that's a good thing. There are large corporations, large companies that do that. There's one called SGS and Intertech, but they charge a lot of money to go in and verify. You have to ask them specifically to verify what you want them to verify, but they can go in these other countries and verify that for you. And then finally, two more practical things that if you're in business, you probably know before I even say it, because what do I know? I went to law school. I don't engage in the actual business, but you want to make sure there's a written agreement setting out all your requirements and how you're going to pay them, what they're entitled, what they're supposed to do. So basically your terms and conditions, and one of that should be no forced labor, no sanctioned entities involved. You should put that in writing, and it can be that simple. Please, not you don't even have to say please. It's terms and conditions. It's a contract or an agreement with your supplier, with your vendor, saying the vendor confirms that no forced labor, child labor, indentured servitude, no sanctioned party, no sanctioned company is being used. Just go through the list and put that in writing, have them sign it and verify it. Make sure it's an authorized person, that it's in English or translated, side-by-side translation into English with the contact person and address and phone number and email. And then the last one that I would recommend is don't pay the full amount before delivery. We've gotten a lot of questions over the years. Hey, they were supposed to deliver. I gave them, I paid up front, and now I'm not getting my product. That is very common. You can sue in New York State Court, for example, and get a judgment very easily. I mean, it'll cost you some money, but you can get a judgment. And what does that do? Because your supplier your vendor is in another country, and they're not going to recognize the judgment. You can try to there's an international convention that you can get the judgment put into that other country. That requires hiring a lawyer in that other country and getting a special certificate. It costs a lot of money. It can be done, but it costs a lot of money. So the easiest thing is do not pay the full amount before delivery. If you have to pay a down payment, put in terms and conditions on that. And they're going to want payment as soon as the goods are shipped. But you also want to know that the goods get in and are in good shape, and are not damaged in any way. They're what you paid for and what you ordered, and written to manufactured to spec. So you want all that, and you want all that put into a written agreement. That is something you can consult a look. I think Mercedes Group. I don't know if you do that, but you can weigh in on that. But also you can use a regular corporate lawyer or a business lawyer that you know in your state that can do a contract for you. If they're familiar with contracts, they can put all that in. So I think I'll end it there and open for questions.
All right. So we do have a few minutes left here in our session today. If you have questions for Robert or Mercedes as well, let's get those answered for you right now. You can put them in the Q&A box or the chat. And Mercedes, I know Robert said there was something that you could speak about. So what was it, Robert, if you could remind me?
Yeah, if your group, SBDC, consults on contracts or terms and conditions, or what should be in a contract, maybe not write the contract itself. I don't know if you provide that service.
I I do provide guidance on how to negotiate with potential distributors, what things to watch for. There are some templates that are available on the web, but I always advise to consult finally with an attorney. But I discuss directly with the customer, and recently, actually, I had a case, you know, discussing, for example, you should provide exclusivity, the logistics portion, also how to find the right information if that person is the adequate person that you should sign the contract with, etc., etc.
Right.
Yeah, and Export U had a template, a distribution contract template, but it doesn't mean that that's what you should produce. You should consult, you know, with an attorney before signing something. Especially if there is money involved, you want to watch what you're doing.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And the longer the contract or the terms and conditions are, you want to read carefully. And to the other side, if it's short, like we promised to give you 10,000 pieces, that's too short. That's not going to help you if anything goes wrong. So you
Yes.
do need to, the old word is to paper it as much as possible.
Yeah. Or what is the where is the jurisdiction on the law, and if there are
Right.
disagreements, and those are
Yeah.
many, yeah, those are important things to take into account. And some, I try to point out to these important things, important points that they should have a discussion.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you. And I just dropped into the chat a link where if you are interested in getting assistance from the NYSBDC, you can click there and follow the instructions that I've put with that link. And also a link if you would like to be updated about upcoming International Trade Initiative webinars. Okay, well, I am not seeing any questions, so we will go ahead and wrap for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanchez-Moore, of course, and then Robert Leo. We are very grateful for all of this really helpful information that you shared today. Like that attendee expressed, these are things that new exporters would not have any experience to know that they should think about these things. So I hope that this will really help some of these newer exporters, and then they're great reminders for those who may already be exporting. And I do want to just let everyone know that there will be a survey that will pop up on your screen if you have a few minutes to give us some feedback. We appreciate that. And I will turn the time over to Dr. Sanchez-Moore and Robert for any parting words.
First, I just wanted to make people aware that I have placed in the chat a list of the software companies that they can use to aid with the screening. But as Robert pointed out, the use of AI can lead to mistakes and also or some producing results that are not exactly accurate. So don't just rely on that as your source of compliance and information. All right. But if you do a Google search, you can find a lot of them that are listed there. And I think that some of the companies have been mentioned by Robert as well. So I wanted to point that out. And also that I have provided our emails in the chat if people want to contact us, both Robert or myself.
Yes, I think that, and please email me because I've gotten so many phone calls that I can't return, and because of all the tariff issues going on. So email me, and
Yes.
I definitely will respond eventually.
All right. Thank you both so much. And we thank you to our attendees, and we wish you all a fantastic rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.